afternoon, a team session around energy transition, a sort of an energy neutral world in one generation. And before we give you a short introduction also on this team, it's good to already introduce the panel, because as you saw, I'm not alone. Thanks for joining already. Jos Keurentjes, Program Director, Energy Transition at the University of Twente. Oscar Kaan, Manager Monitoring at Deloitte. And Bart Breedijk, Innovation Coordinator at Heijmans. We already promised to do like the tutoriëren, as we call it in Dutch, as in just say each other's names, to make it a bit more comfortable also for you at home, because this could be really a topic with all kind of words where maybe students think like, okay, what are we talking about? But as promised already at the kickoff, there's a lot to talk about with the recent news already, what you saw probably. But before we dive into the discussion and the topic of it and see what the opinions are, it's good to give you a bit of introduction what actually this team means. And for that, we give the stage to Professor Jos Keurentjes.
Thank you very much. It's nice to give an introduction. If I would talk about the energy transition, we are talking about a huge theme. It's involving the entire world. It's definitely a global issue. It is not so much a thing that we have to solve in Twente or locally. It is really something that crosses border in all sorts of ways. Moreover, it's not the only major transition that we are looking at. It's also, at this point in time, we are facing a whole list of major transitions when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to mobility, when it comes to circularity. It's digitization, which is essentially across everything. The world is changing at a tremendous pace. The only thing that I would like to add to that is that the energy transition is instrumental in realizing many of the other transitions. For example, if we have cheap and abundant energy available, then all of a sudden providing good water quality to the entire world all of a sudden becomes much easier than in the current situation. So I think this is really what emphasizes the importance of the energy transition. I would like to focus on one specific sub-theme of the energy transition, and that is talking about climate. As quite often the energy transition is seen as how can we transfer from a fossil-based energy provision into something that is renewable. However, there is much more to that when we connect the climate issue to it. And probably the most important issue to talk about is CO2. Very often I hear people say we need to reduce our emissions. And the statement, and for me the starting point of the discussion for today, is that that is simply not good enough. We need to do much more than that. We have built up a debt, I should say, in the past 100 years, by burning enormous amounts of fossil fuels. And the CO2 that has gone into the atmosphere, it has now reached a level of about 400 ppm, which essentially is still rather low. But if we continue to do as we do, and even if we would reduce our emissions almost to zero, then the global temperature rise will continue to values that are way beyond the Paris Agreement. So what we need to do is to take back part of the CO2 that has been emitted in the past 100 years. You see now that a number of parties are becoming involved in that. Maybe not so much the traditional industry, but I see, for example, financing schemes come for this kind of technologies to be developed, which go typically from the unusual providers of funding for this. I see Microsoft having a 1 billion fund for reducing atmospheric CO2 to eventually reduce their own footprint in a historic perspective. Jeff Bezos just announced a 10 billion fund for this. I see a specific investment funds coming along that focus specifically on this kind of technologies. So from a technical point of view, we should realize it is a very difficult task because it is an uphill battle, starting with something that is only available at 400 ppm in the atmosphere. So that is extremely difficult. And I think, and that is what we are currently doing, we are building a significant program around this topic to tackle all the issues that come along with this. It's not just about technology. If we look at the way the atmosphere, the world can deal with the carbon dioxide, the oceans play an important role. You can catch it in biomass. Nature plays an important role, and often you hear reforestation as a tool to do so. However, it is also quite obvious that if we do that in with the speed that nature can pick up the CO2, it will be good, but it will be too slow. So we need to enhance that process by installing all kind of other means, and that can encompass a number of things. Direct air capture, as it is called, is going to be a very important tool in that, because that's the first step to make. You need to grasp it first, and then you can continue. And we see a number of routes. You can transfer it into carbon, and carbon can be used for soil enhancement. So that is a very positive thing to do. You can also store it away, let's say, as the 21st century coal. A second route is towards carbonate. A third one is that you make polymers and chemical products from the CO2. If we assume that from 2050 on, no fossil sources come into the system anymore, then CO2 is essentially the only carbon source that we have. So we have to work with that very effectively. And I think that will change the technologies that we have. It will also change the products that we typically work with. A typical example, I don't think if you take CO2 as a starting point, it is not logical to produce polyolefins, which is very logical if you start from oil or gas, but it's not logical starting with a highly oxygenated compound like CO2. And polyolefins, polyethylene, polypropylene, foils, packaging, you use it every day. I think that is definitely going to change in the years to come. So we have to think that it's not just technology, it is also a question of where are you going to do it. So there is also a geo aspect in all this. Not only what is the best location for doing things, but also the political situation. So geopolitics is also going to play quite a role there in terms of how to do that. And what I was saying about the transformation into carbon to be used for soil enhancement, that is typically something that you would like to do in desert-like regions. Also to push back a little bit the ever-enhancing desert formation that we currently see. Well, and finally, it involves citizens in all kinds of different ways. We have to adapt our behavior. There is ethics involved. What is good to do and what is not good. If we want to use the oceans for trapping CO2, is that something that we would like to see? Because of, well, part of that will be irreversible. That can become quite a diligent question in the future to come. So this is a whole spectrum of issues that we have to deal with. And my general statement would be, we have a huge amount of challenges ahead to organize this, also because there is pressure. We need to do it extremely fast. And I often say to people in this kind of domains, the next stop is typically 10 years ahead. So it's not 10 years, it's basically tomorrow. And that is the big challenge that we are facing here, to get this done and organized in a relatively short period of time. And I think that is the starting point for the discussion that we would like to have here this afternoon. Thank you.
Nice. Thanks, Jos, for the introduction on the topic. So, gentlemen, I'm from Novelty. Novelty is a part of the university, so let me pick the side of the university this time. One of the things Jos mentioned, it's not good enough. Of course, in a university, we do science, we think of things, we come up with solutions, but it's also Deloitte, Heijmans, as in your responses, as in what do you think of that it's not good enough?
Well, I think what is very interesting from the story of Jos is that academia is always looking a bit further ahead. And the negative technologies that Jos talked about are very important to get us to the ambitions that we need to realize. And if we want to get those technologies in practice in the time that we need it, we need to develop them now. So it's really about upscaling. And those technologies are there currently. They are just, it needs a lot of scaling up. Yes, we are on a good track. We have made a lot of progress, I think, in the last 10 years, especially with regards to the electricity system. It is now the question for the next 10 years, how are we going to deal with molecules, and that the negative technologies are really part of that solution.
But any?
Yeah, the problem I see is that who wants to pay for it? With all these energy transitions, we go to customers. They all say, well, you know, energy is cheap, CO2. If pollution doesn't cost any money, so why should I? I got a business model to run. So we have to think about how do we pay it, but how do we get other systems running that make it valuable? And you see some systems going. The Shell yesterday, the ruling.
You bring it up.
The ruling.
It's time to talk about Shell.
Banks that don't want to finance anymore, that isn't green, all that kind of systems. But you also see little systems starting up. For instance, I'm using Ecosia as a search engine, and they invest money in planting trees. And with my surfing, I've compensated all my CO2.
But that's the start, eh? Indeed, like this is compensating. Of course, you said it's not good enough, so we need to do more. Maybe to catch up indeed with Shell. You mentioned it, so we can do it, and I mentioned it already 5 times. But we were talking when you got your microphones off backstage here, and I've heard also you saying like, wow, yeah, this is impactful. So it's not like, oh yeah, it's the Dutch court rules on something and nice, but it is. Is this like well for the debt part of a thing that the Royal Dutch Shell, but it's across the world, has to comply with certain goals?
My simple view on this is that, and that also is part of the answer, I would say, to Bart's issue, is that in the end, things have to cost what they cost. And I think that is going to make the step forward in also in answering the question, who is going to pay? Last year, the oil price was extremely low. So low that recycling plastics was economically completely unfeasible. Then you say, this can't be true. And that is simply because oil is not having the price it should have, because of the environmental and climate burden that intrinsically is part of that. So I think in the end, the world population will have to pay for this in an integral way. And I think, and then you come to Shell, the large companies, they will have to take a significant share of that. So things like profitability and pricing of products and services, I guess that is something that is really going to change, and is not. It will be the challenge to make that a socially acceptable spread across the globe, and I think that will happen, and that's simply because of the ethics that are in there. I think people start seeing that we really have to pay what it really costs.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Jos, but I also see that there is a bit. I mean, we also need to be realistic here. I mean, 80% of the world population has never flown, has never seen an airplane from within. the middle class that wants to, that had the poor people that have the first chance to get a refrigerator, to get a washing machine. I mean, that group of people that will go into the middle class, they will require a lot more energy. And just saying that energy will just cost more, that will be an extremely large challenge to get that globally in a social responsible manner.
Well, there is a good thing to this. Last year, a very large PV park, photovoltaic park in Dubai was assigned. 900 megawatts, so that is on the scale of a reasonable electricity generation plant. And the contract price was 1.6 cents per kilowatt hour. If you translate that into an oil price, that would be something like $5 per barrel. If you take that as a starting point, you can say, okay, at some point, renewable energy will be cheaper than fossil energy. In other words, the fossil era will not end because we run out of oil, but because there is a cheaper alternative. And then there is not so much an issue with a new emerging middle class that requires that energy. Energy will become, and that's my view, will become extremely cheap, and especially in those regions where those emerging middle classes are. Read India, China, Indonesia, and some other areas in the world. But I think that is, it's going to solve itself more or less. Because of this, and this example, I think, definitely shows it.
Okay, before I also continue, of course, on these topics, the people at home also have the opportunity in the chat to ask questions, also regarding what we are talking. So before we maybe then miss the question because we really answered already, we have one of our colleagues, Manon, sitting in the green room. Actually, behind you is sort of data center, so I don't know what it compares to what it's being worked on, but let's hear it, what is coming into the chats.
Hi everybody. We have a question from Cherry. He wants to know to what extent governments have a bigger role to play in making critical choices to facilitate and accelerate the needed transition. He would like your opinion about that.
Thank you. I think it is a proper question, also regarding to even maybe the Shell situation, because the discussion yesterday was also like, hey, is this up to like a Dutch court, for instance? It's not our government, but is it up to a Dutch court to rule these kind of things? So what about the government?
I want to make it smaller. The whole energy transition in buildings has only started when there became ruling from the government. You have to lower your CO2. You have to do scans. You have to do. And if you don't, you get a penalty. So I think that's a real strong arm of the government, and they have to use it. They have to say, if you want to pollute, fine, but you pay, and you pay big. So that's the only thing they listen to. At the end, the accountant says pollution is too expensive. Start innovating. Because it's not, you don't have a good business model. You will go broke on this one.
Yeah, I think I agree with that point. I think if you look at how are we currently paying for that emissions, that's in Europe via the ETS, the European trading system, but I don't think that will be enough. If we want to maintain the industry in the Netherlands, the big, large, heavy industry that creates a lot of jobs, we can't just rely on the ETS to decarbonize our energy system in the Netherlands, because simply those companies that are competing on a global market will be pushed out of the Netherlands and eventually the world. So the government needs to take an additional action apart from the ETS and paying for carbon, with providing those companies with viable solutions. For example, with providing the hydrogen infrastructure that those industry needs to decarbonize. And the CO2 infrastructure to get rid of your CO2, for example, via the Portals project in the Rotterdam area. So I think it's not just about paying for the carbon, but also providing the right infrastructure for companies to be able to make the transition.
like we did 1930s, 1940s, with transition from coal to gas.
Yeah, exactly.
The government paid for the gas pipes.
Yeah, but it's just too simple to say, well, we have the ETS, that will be the solution. If that carbon price will be high enough, we decarbonize automatically. We also have to take care of our current Dutch system with the amount of jobs that industry is generating.
But I think it's also being addressed already. Of course, it's a worldwide problem, cliché. But the government in, let's say, in the Netherlands is not per se the same as in other countries. So indeed, if you talk about the role of the government, I think some governments maybe in some countries have other issues that are really important right now, but still also have their impact. So how could they profit from the negative emission, especially? So not only just, okay, we do well because maybe we don't have all the stuff right now, so we also couldn't bring in the damage, but how could they profit then?
Well, I think Jos made a very good point in that, is that in some areas you don't even need the government to step in because it's just super commercial to develop these climate neutral technologies. I think Vietnam doesn't have any climate policy from the government. Still, their solar and wind capacity additions have been enormous the last couple of years. The same holds for the US, where you see under the Trump era, there was still a large capacity addition in solar and wind, also in Texas, the oil state of the US. So, and that's just because it has become commercial. These technologies have become commercial.
So it is being mentioned, but you already said it. First of all, how do we pay for it? But also, the question is then, is there a business case to make out of it?
I think in the recent IE report, it was very obvious that there is a huge business case in terms of jobs alone. We may lose a few jobs, relatively speaking, in, let's say, in the traditional businesses, but we gain a huge number of jobs in getting this transition done and getting all those changes organized. For the Netherlands alone, there is people are talking about a human capital agenda that involves hundreds of thousands of jobs needed to realize this transition, and that is many more than in the, let's say, the oil and gas and that related business potentially can be lost. I don't believe that will directly happen, but I think and that was very clearly stated. The net balance is a very positive one. So job-wise, it's a big opportunity, much more than a threat.
But I agree on you because within the infra, we got infra within the Heijmans, and they're making the shift from roads to cables, because TenneT has doubled his personnel and has billions of euros ready to invest in Netherlands and in Germany just to lay down those cables to make it possible to make the energy transition. So our people aren't using the machines to make roads, but to lay cables.
But I think it's an important one, because of course I can imagine for a government, for instance, the business case on jobs is quite important. Yeah. But let's say again Shell, yeah, you're not per se there to create a lot of jobs. Of course, maybe they will say it's important and blah blah blah. But it's also, at the end of the day, there's like is and then a number. As in,
well, what's happening on the stock market? Well, what will stockbrokers say in? Well, what's the value of Shell in 20, 25 years with this ruling? So if they don't change the company, they got a problem with the stock value. So that's their interest, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I can't say too much about stock markets for Shell, but I think in general oil and gas companies will have a challenge to remain as lucrative as they are currently. Because even if they make the transition to the more low carbon solutions, those markets have much lower margins. And the power and utility companies have much lower margins than traditional oil and gas. So yes, they will face a large transition, not only in the type of business they will do, but also the type of risk reward that they will get.
But then still, we were talking about the industry and the government, what they can do. But you also mentioned already, a lot of people didn't see a plane, at least from the inside. Maybe they flew over because there are a lot of planes in the air, have access to certain things. So it demands also a real behavior issue.
Yes, and that I think is interesting to see in the younger generation. I count myself still a bit of that, where this generation and all my friends around me want to fly the world, especially after Corona has left us. We want to fly to Thailand, to Australia, to the US, and I think going forward that will be much more expensive, and there needs to be behavioral change to get us to the Paris Agreement goals, because aviation is one of the hard-to-abate sectors. And then we made the connection to Jos's negative emission technologies, where you see that one of the solutions to decarbonize aviation is to create sustainable aviation fuels. Called power to liquid, solar fuels, you name it. And I know that in Asia they call it liquid sunshine, even better in term. But those technologies will be required to decarbonize those hard-to-abate sectors, but will also require our behavioral change.
I think the pricing, as I said, things will have to cost what they cost. And if a ticket from Amsterdam to Barcelona is 35 euros, you don't have to be extremely clever to realize that is not a real price. So at some point, I think when you can make that transition and can make the acceptance that things cost what they cost, then I think it's much easier to equilibrate the system at some point. And then I would say the desire of the younger generation to fly the world is understandable, but also I would say is a desire that I would now be inclined to denote as typically 20th century. And things will have to change, and that is a behavior issue. I think in the past year, because of Corona, I think many people have learned that spending time even in the small country of the Netherlands and slightly around, it can also offer attractive holidays. And it is not necessarily to fly. It's not necessary to fly 3, 4, 5 times a year across the globe. If you reduce that to maybe to 1, you already make a significant contribution.
True. And we will go to the Q&A, or Q&A, we're in a sort of Q&A, but to the chat also, because there's a question also that is about, of course, some things that then also will change, also for instance for landscape and stuff, first we go there, but then I also want to discuss, because we talk about people that didn't see a plane, or for instance the younger generation. Of course at home we talk also to student houses and people that like raise up and they go studying or whatever they're going to do, they want to see the world. And I don't consider any of you an old person or whatever, but then you have, let's say you're old, let's say we have these old persons talking about an issue that they like, don't fly anymore, don't do the cheap tickets anymore. We did, like for a long time, we enjoyed everything, but now up to you. So this is like a bit of triggering emotions already, and then you can answer in a bit. So first let's go to Manon. With
everybody who wants to go flying and see the world, and who lives in Europe, I say buy an Interrail ticket. It costs only 1,000 euros. You can travel a month through Europe with trains. And you see more than you ever see in New York or all the big cities.
We even get a travel tip indeed already. That's nice. Manon, what is the question that is in the chat?
In the chat, Sergio, he asked about the influence of solar farms and wind turbines on the landscape of the Netherlands. Because does it influence, and is it negative or positive effect on the landscape?
Thanks, indeed. As being said already, the question a bit is it will have impact or whatever it is called, but on this generation. So we had like oil from the ground. We did all kind of things for a long time, and then hey, too bad, climate. We need to be even paying back the debt. But who's paying back the debt, and what is it for the environment?
There is one thing very important to realize, and that is if we would like to provide sustainable energy for our industry, our housing and built environment, and mobility, we can do on the surface of the Netherlands and the part of the North Sea that we consider ours, we can provide 1/3 of the energy that we need. In other words, imports will remain a very important part of that equation. And the question is, to what extent do you want to have your own possibilities, and to what extent are you going to accept imports, for example, based on this solar field in Dubai or whatever place? And I think that balance is, listening to quite some of the governmental persons, they talk as if they believe that the Netherlands can become autarkic in its energy provision in a sustainable way. And then my simple wording would be, dream on, this is never going to happen. And for taking that as a starting point, I can imagine that the discussion around landscape, having windmills, solar parks, whatever, in your neighborhood, the typical response that you currently hear is, well, it's nice, but not in my backyard. Yeah. I think there is something to that discussion is not done yet, and I'm very much convinced that if you take this from an international perspective, I think you can move away from the most ugly part of it. I won't say you can get away from everything, but finding a balance, I think, is going to happen in the 10, 20 years to come. I'm convinced of that.
I think it's also, again, that behavioral thing, because you mentioned already, a lot of people are like, yeah, we are for windmills, but hey, not that close to my home. And I think that all the companies have their, we try to make impact, we try to do a lot for the world, but when it hits your own bank account for your business, then it's like, no, rather some other company, let Shell do it, let somebody else do it. But you mentioned already the 30s and the 40s, as in, of course, we all certain were not there yet, but I think, at least what you see on the images, you saw these coal pipes, like these smoke pipes everywhere, because that was the landscape. So is it also kind of behavioral thing, as in just like, yeah, get used to it, because it costs what it costs, but it is what it is. As in, if we want to do it, it's just this.
You have to get used to it, yeah, because everybody wants to live, and we're building houses everywhere. So once that was nature, and now there are houses. Nobody's complaining because I want to live there. And then it's no problem. And now, because I want to have energy, I'm worried about a windmill in the backyard. Yeah, it's you have to accept some things that are happening, and that's part of the deal, I think. Otherwise, stop using energy.
Yeah.
No, but I think you guys, as a construction company, you have the unique opportunity to make a connection between large-scale infrastructure, which you need to build anyway, and connect that with energy generation. Yep. Then if you can connect those two in a proper way, I can think that you would be able to provide a significant amount of energy that way, without having the discussion about should there be a solar field in a small village or two large windmills, whatever.
That's true. We're combining a lot of more energy sources than wind and solar. Yeah. We're also using bioelectrical gas, thermal energy. The whole mixture is the solution, and that's why I don't know the equation you use for the 1/3 of the energy, but if that equation is only windmills and solar panels, I believe it. But we also look at all the bioelectrical energy we can get out of fertilizing, just out of bioenergy.
Biofuels?
Biofuels, yeah. Just turn shit into gas. That's what we partly do. You solve two problems. One, we got farmers that don't have any problems anymore, and we have a lot of energy within a pipe system that we already have, within a heating system that we already have. Yeah. So the solution is more than one.
Yeah. But and again, it's also about business models. Now, luckily, I already heard there's a question, Manon, around business models.
Hello. With a question, which business model is applicable for solar energy in areas which don't use electricity? or don't have electricity?
Okay.
Yeah, interesting question. And I think what you see increasingly is that solar and wind production is cannibalizing itself. So with more solar and wind, the time they produce, they get a relatively low price for their production. So what you see is that they're combining that production with storage, either being a battery storage or increasingly also considering hydrogen storage. And we as Deloitte are supporting Norwich H2, the largest green hydrogen project in the north of the Netherlands. Sorry, the largest green hydrogen project in Europe, which hopefully will be located in the north of the Netherlands, which will combine 4 gigawatts of offshore wind with a gigawatt of electrolyzer. And that's also because just to shift production of your wind or solar to a different point in time when prices are higher. And that brings then value to your business case. So you see increasingly these type of business models where we have to integrate these intermittent sources into the electricity system. And you see innovative business models being increasingly developed around that. One more thing, one element on that is that you see that there is a large issues around congestion. Where solar wind production, especially in the region, has to travel to the Randstad, the big municipalities in the west of the Netherlands, and you see that you can circumvent some of those investments in these grids, which bring a lot of costs, of course, by using the existing network to a gas network to move energy from one place to another, and that's what Gasunie is doing, transitioning part of their gas network to hydrogen, also to transport energy from one side of the country to another side of the country.
Yeah.
What is important to realize in this discussion, you are mainly talking about the large-scale grid. What I would like to emphasize here is that we are going to work in a sort of multi-scale. We have the local, let's say, household and just a set of houses. We have an entire city, we have the region, and we have the national and international scale. And I think we are going to have a multi-node kind of system where many things are being organized on a relatively local scale. And then is the amount of energy that you have to transfer to level out differences across those nodes is going to be significantly lower. So I think that is a system approach that is now coming into view. The traditional parties like Enexis and let's say the grid owners, they typically think from this large grid perspective. Yep. But I think you have to take that from two sides, and then the citizen who generates electricity with PV panels on the roof is one side, and the large scale gigawatt wind power is the other end of the scale, and you have to connect those two.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very interesting but doable challenge for the coming years.
Yeah, I like that because you see that in the startup space, there's a lot of small startups that are becoming scale-ups in that space of managing the local electricity networks of neighborhoods, being electricity platforms, peer-to-peer trading, all kinds of different business models that those startups are exploring. But what I do see is that those startups are sometimes hindered by regulation. Where tax issues and network regulation sometimes hinders those new business models.
In the discussion around the RES, the Regional Energy Strategy, I heard a presentation from Enexis talking about what needs to be done to make the grid applicable to what we can expect in the future, and they needed investments significantly. And then I asked, but why aren't you talking about storage as a way to buffer out many of those changes? And then the answer was, well, that is not in our lawful task. Yep. So we have it's simply beyond our scope. Yep. And I think what we need to do, and that is a challenge for all of us, to bridge the gaps between the traditional silos that we have to really make the system a system and not just what I would call in Dutch a ballenbak of individual things that are slightly interconnected.
Yeah.
We got now an example in Veenendaal. That's an heat net for about few hundred houses. And all those houses have also got solar panels. But when the sun is shining, nobody wants to have the energy. And the grid isn't strong enough to transform the energy further on the lane. So what we're now doing, we're installing heaters, electrical heaters. And when there's more than enough sun, we make hot water. And in the evening, we sell it back to the owners of the homes to take a shower or a bath, or whatever. So there you got a small grid that uses the energy on a smart way, because the people who run this energy system, they earn money from it. So they need a business case that works.
But that's very local, what you're describing now. Yeah.
It's a few hundred houses, nothing more.
It's good to see that we're already heading a bit in a few examples, like solar energy, of course. We talked about a fossil fuel, but there's also a question coming in about hydrogen. Manon.
Yes, the question is if theoretically hydrogen begins to represent a significant replacement of the actual oil markets, could you imagine it being controlled as a monopoly? And in that case, which country or which world power could be possibly the most likely candidate?
So this is
Nice question.
3 in 1, a nice question. Indeed. I think yesterday people were already talking about the Amazon buying MGM. Indeed, about like, do we only have 8 companies left for like the monopoly position of the world? Who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about it. I've worked the last 2 years on predominantly hydrogen projects, and I think what you see is that really in the Netherlands we're a front runner, and that also means that I'm constantly questioned by colleagues around the world on the topic of hydrogen and what is happening. And I think you see different regions in the world taking different positions. So for example, Asia, China especially, is really driving the technology, electrolyzers, getting those down the cost curve. Japan is an energy importer and really wants to use hydrogen as a sustainable source. Australia is trying to capitalize on their resources and experimenting with shipping liquid hydrogen from Australia to Japan. In Europe, we are, of course, trying to really make that hydrogen demand going in our industries, because those industries need hydrogen to decarbonize. So we will be producing our own hydrogen, probably with electrolyzers that are produced elsewhere, but especially the demand centers will be in Europe. Yeah, go ahead, Jos.
Yeah, there's when looking at hydrogen, you're saying industries, and I very much can see that industry is going to use to produce and use hydrogen as an important commodity, as they are currently also doing, but not at the scale that you would expect in the future. I was worried about a year and a half ago when there was an NOS Journaal item with a person in Leidse Rijn in Utrecht who had his solar panels on the roof, who had a small electrolyzer in his shed, and a little vial with hydrogen somewhere in his backyard. If you connect that picture with the picture of a hydrogen fueling station in Oslo that was exploded 2 years ago, if you combine those two, then I would say hydrogen is most likely going to be used in a confined environment as industry can provide it. I am not so sure if hydrogen is going to be the commodity for, let's say, the average person. Also, if you take into account that hydrogen is not extremely high in energy density, if you go toward liquid fuels, there is a factor of 1,000 in between. So that is what you can gain. So I think I'm not so sure. Looking at the hydrogen story, you have believers and you have non-believers. And I would like to step a little bit away from that digital approach towards hydrogen and see where it can play an important role, as you say, in industry, no doubt, and also where you shouldn't. And I think that balance has yet not been found.
There's another solution, that's end asset. mierenzuur. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's...
Yeah, yeah.
And we're already using
Formic.
it in... how do you say it called in English?
Formic acid.
Formic acid, okay. We're already using it at building sites where we have a problem with diesel. Because we have stickstof, all those problems with stickstof. And we're using that to generate electricity for our building sites. So that's a form of energy that can be safely put into cars, transported. And to answer the question, I think all the Arabian companies have the solution. Because they got a lot of desert with a lot of sun. You use a lot of skills, just mirrors. Black pipe, you make steam. Steam makes electricity. Electricity makes hydrogen. You add CO2, then you get your CO2 out of the air. And you get your acid. So then you can transport it in tankers. You skip the whole refrigeration. And you put it in your car again.
Yeah, I think, and the question is, how can you make that commercial in what time frame? But I do see that there will be direct use of hydrogen and indirect use of hydrogen, for example, in formic acid or in sustainable aviation fuels, making e-kerosene with hydrogen, CO2 from air, and then burn it in the airplane. That is indeed a big application for hydrogen as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often say hydrogen is going to be apart from industrial use, it's going to be very important, but mostly as a short-living intermediate. So you produce it, but you take it away immediately using CO2 towards formic acid, towards methanol, towards DME, whatever.
Yeah.
There are many possibilities there to store the hydrogen and CO2 in a sustainable and transportable manner.
Yeah.
Indeed, and I think we're in our last 15 minutes somehow. So I think we addressed a lot already. Yeah? So we talked about hydrogen, we talked about fossil fuels, about behavior, the industry, the government. But one thing, not that I missed it, because that's why I bring it also up, is the financial market. Of course, the stock exchange, but that's often just from sometimes industry or a company. As I think you've mentioned once, indeed, like if I think most people at home don't want, if you buy a boat, it's probably not like a huge oil tank or whatever the shipping container kind of thing it is. But yeah, you don't buy such a thing, or maybe even a cars. Like even if you bring it home to narrow it down to what people still do. Yeah, what kind of car do you buy? Do you buy that old kind of car and don't know if it's still worth the value, or you still need to use it for a long time? So what is the role of the financial markets?
Yeah, I think that is one of the big reasons. I think. Right, two things. One is that the amount of capital you need for the energy transition is hampering it, but also it gives opportunity to accelerate. Let me explain. So one of the reasons that I think the energy transition can be, well, we try to move it as fast as possible, but we are seeing hindrance, is that a lot of the assets that are now currently there just have a long lifetime. Your ships are 30 to 40 years. You can use them. The lifetime of an airplane is 30 to 40 years. Tata Steel in IJmuiden will only invest once in 30 years into a completely new technology. So those capital requirements on such a long scale are hindering a super fast transition, like other transitions have maybe gone, like public smoking, the acceptance of gay marriage, which is much more behavioral type of things. On the other hand, and maybe Bart will talk about that in a bit more, is that financial markets can really be a accelerator of the transition. If shareholders don't want to invest anymore in companies that don't have a sustainable future, then suddenly things can move very fast.
Yeah,
that's true. I want to take Amazon in this equation, because Amazon has a real good model, but also very bad behavior towards people. And now you see in shifting that people are saying, well, it's cheap and it's fast and it's good, but is this the company I want to bring my money to? So that's a shift we want to make with energy also. So when companies get bad blaming, people will move away from them, like people do from social media. It's much easier to move away from social media than from your company. But when one company gets the real blame of really being polluting, and that's what Shell is happening in Nigeria and all other that kind of places, then people won't invest anymore. And the markets are emotional. They're not always radical. So that's the power we have as people.
Just a little anecdote that I was involved in a couple of years ago in a discussion with the Rotterdam Port Authority. They were also looking at opportunities to decarbonize the port region. And they organized a big session with the CEOs of all the major companies that were present there. And they were telling, well, we're going to decarbonize. And then the complete audience went silent. And there was no willingness at all to invest. And the Port Authority was surprised by that. And then I told them, well, you should realize, and that's exactly your story, there is depending on where you put the boundaries, but roughly 400 billion in assets in this region. Those companies want to exploit those assets for as many years as possible and not starting to reinvest in new things. The solution to that is partly in governmental investments, but also what you see is that the scale, when Shell invests in something, it's a multi-billion project quite easily. What I see now is that the investment in the energy transition is being spread out to many companies, smaller companies, individuals, and that will lower the burden significantly. And when you're talking the financial markets, they will be happy to finance that kind of trajectories also because spreading it over many small ones reduces the risk significantly as compared to one multi-billion project where potentially there is a risk somewhere along the line. And I see that change is really happening where you step away from a few big companies that make the investments and organize for the system towards a broad array of small and big companies, citizens, all kind of levels where you see that the investments are being done. And then I would say the total investment, well, in the old world, scale was efficiency, and that is what was the most effective. I think now we are going to see a sort of scale up by scale out will become the standard. And I think that will lower the risk for the financial markets. So the willingness to invest will definitely be there because there is a lot of money available.
Yeah, and you see that the interest on money that's put into green is lower than to grey. So if I want to sell a solution and the company doesn't have money, I can get 20 investment companies that want to help me. Yeah. Because we're investing in green solutions. Yeah. And that's beautiful. That's the power we need. And that's a small scale, but a lot of small scale.
Yeah.
So it's going into a proper direction. Let's go to the last a question from the people at home. Manon.
I had a question about COVID related. Comparing the World Energy Challenge with the recent COVID global failure of countries to work together to fight a threat of that dimension. Why should we believe that we could achieve a good collaboration when we talk about the energy issues?
Okay, that's it's a decent question.
And I got another question for the one who asked them. How good was the collaboration between the companies that developed the vaccines? So you saw that the power was not within the governments, but was in the companies and and all the professors and all the research that was done. And they made it possible for 1 year to develop a vaccine.
So bluntly saying, you should completely rely on government, but also, especially on those companies that maybe also created the mess.
One important issue here is that, and that is not only in the Netherlands, but it is very explicit in the Netherlands, that let's say, the knowledge component on governmental level is fairly limited. We have seen that in how to deal with the whole COVID crisis. But for the energy transition, it's exactly the same kind of story. I once heard the CEO of Eneco saying in The Hague, well, if I have a plan, I have no clue who I should give it, and I'm sure that that person understands my plan. So that is typically the kind of thing that we really have to find a way. The claim for a business cabinet was also partly coming from that perspective. Kees Veerman, a couple of weeks ago, he proposed that as a good intermediate cabinet for the years to come. But I think solving this contents issue is definitely an issue that we have to, and that our government has to work on, and has to have, I would say, some self-reflection on how to deal with that. Because if we would be talking about this topic, this discussion, as we have it here, with people from the House of Parliament, there will be 5 persons there that would roughly follow what we are talking about. And all of the rest, they are pretty disconnected with the contents of the discussion. That is a challenge we all have to face. So in the audience, if there are people that feel their future is in politics, I think we need you.
I think it's that indeed is true, and indeed talking about the audience, we will finish off because in 20 minutes the other talk will also start from this stage. Again, we're here at Create Tomorrow, so we've talked about all the details or like all kind of elements around the energy transition, but we still have an audience that tomorrow will work on challenges also on the team energy transition, and to narrow it down a bit to here and now. So I give you all the three, give you like roughly 20 or 30 seconds to just give like your best advice or tip, so you could choose yourself if it's on a personal level, as in, hey, please don't fly, please don't book Ryanair or whatever, especially maybe not now, but more as in all these kind of companies, or like maybe on the topic of, hey, finance, whatever it is. So let's see who has the longest time to think. Jos, not then, but let's start with you.
The big question that we are looking at is a global issue, and coming back to the very beginning of this discussion, I would say, please think about ways to actively decrease the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, and try to come up with bright ideas to realize that in a cost-effective and energy-effective way, because that is the big risk here, that you spend more energy on trapping than that you effectively gain in the CO2 that you trap. So that challenge, I would say, anybody who has a bright idea about that, please come to me in, well, it can be tomorrow, can be any moment in time, but I think this is really what the world needs, and I think as we are talking here, we can really find solutions because of this multidisciplinary approach that we typically have in the house. So please come to me with bright ideas.
Great, thanks. Oscar.
Well, I think the one advice that I would like to give is, yes, think about your own behavior, but I would really try to encourage you to devote your career to this fascinating topic. I've been working in this area now 10 years, and it's every day it's new. It is working on the biggest societal challenge that we are facing. So I really want to, encourage you to devote your career to it. I think at the time that you will finish your jobs, that will be, in my case, 2060, maybe even further. You can look back and see what we have achieved as a society. We hope to get to net zero in 2050 in Europe, in the Netherlands. And I think it is a great way of spending your professional life.
Thank you. Bart. You had the longest time to think.
Yeah, it's also a hard question for me, I think. I think the advice I can give is look at your own behavior and make choices that are good. With our choices, and social media proves it, all companies prove it. If all customers change their behavior, companies will change because they don't have any customers anymore.
Nice.
So if we all start using Ecosia as a search engine instead of Google, Google has to change its business because they have no business anymore. And that's what I want to give you. Think of the companies you use, think of the things you use, and make your steps.
Yeah.
Use your power.
Thanks, indeed. For the people at home, indeed, you have power. If you're at your student house and think I'm still young, you have power to make a change. Thank you all for your insights. Jos, Oscar, Bart, it was great to do this session on energy transition with you. We're sort of out of time, so take your break again for another 15 minutes. This was the team session on energy transition, and in 15 minutes, so at 2:30, Hidde will sit here to discuss the topic of smart cities. So we will see you back. Grab yourself a cup of coffee in 15 minutes. Thanks for the people also with the questions, and see you another time.